What's up, y'all? Welcome to the Chess Giant. This is Solomon Ordell, and in today's video we're covering a surprisingly solid and underrated system for black against the move of e4, which is this move of knight c6 with the Nimzowitsch Defense. Now guys, one of the biggest advantages of this move, on top of the fact that it is a solid system, is the fact that the e4 player is hardly ever going to be prepared against it. In fact, I myself have played e4 since I was a kid, and I gotta be honest, I have not studied from the white perspective the theory against the Nimzowitsch a single time growing up, simply because I never saw it. In fact, I don't think I saw knight c6 a single time in an over-the-board tournament game. Guys, oftentimes knight c6 gets swept under the rug from both the e4 player and the black player going against that centralized move. I mean, there's so many different things the e4 player has to worry about, right? This move of e6 with the French, a more classical option like e5, the Perk, Scandinavian, Carl Kahn, Sicilian, Owen's Defense, Modern, Alekhines. There's so many different things that this e4 player has to worry about. And if you never see this move in knight c6, why study against it? So, I mean, honestly, when you first play this move in knight c6, white's probably not going to be too worried. They're probably going to think that you're playing a subpar opening, but this has been played thousands of times at the master and grandmaster level. But if you really try to memorize the lines and variations shown in this video, and also watch it through a few times to really get the concepts, ideas, and strategies, you're going to be on your way to getting great middle game positions and going on to win more games. Now, most of the time here, guys, white's going to play this move with d4, right? If white doesn't play d4, we always have that option of playing e5 and just entering into a regular e4, e5, and knight c6 setup. If here white does play the move d4, black has two main options, both of which we're going to be covering in this video. The first is the Scandinavian variation with d5, putting some pressure on e4. And secondly, we have the Kennedy variation of e5, putting some pressure on d4. I'm going to be going over both again in this video, and I'll leave it up to you on which one you like more and which one you want to go with. On top of that, if you kind of like both, you can always try both out and see how you like it from a practical level. Let's first cover this move of d5. This is the most popular option at the master and grandmaster level, putting some pressure on e4. And in this video, we're going to be covering four main moves from white, including the main question, okay, what happens if white just takes on d5? We're then going to be covering this move of e5, white trying to expand in the center of the board with the advanced variation. We'll cover this move of knight c3 as well, which sometimes white tries to go with if they are prepared for the theory. And finally, this move of bishop b5. You don't really see this move a ton as black, but I do want to cover it simply because if black doesn't know what they're doing, we can fall into trouble very quickly. So guys, let's first again cover this move. The obvious question, what happens if white takes on d5? Unlike a French defense or a Carl Kahn defensive type system, we can't take back with the pawn, but we are going to capture back with our queen and put a ton of pressure on d4. And here, if we see a move like knight f3 even, we're going to continue with e5. Yet again, guys, we have to play active in the Nimzowitsch defense. After knight c6, we can't play passive chess. We got to develop our pieces as quickly as we possibly can. And in this case, we don't have one or two pieces attacking d4, but also this pawn on e5, and our bishops are locked and ready to go on the back rank at a moment's notice. Now, guys, there are a few different things that white can try here, but let's answer this question of why white can't just take on e5, right? I mean, okay, sure, we're putting a ton of pressure on d4. Why can't white just get rid of that pressure, however, and take on e5? Whole idea being if we take on e5 back with a knight, we simply lose our queen. Well, guys, in this case, we don't need to worry about winning this pawn off right away. In fact, we're simply going to trade off. And notice now this white king cannot castle and our king can. We're going to continue here with this move of bishop g4, threatening to win this pawn on e5 as this knight is pinned to the king. And look, white can try to keep holding on to their pawns. They can play a move like bishop f4. They can play a move here like king e1, holding on to f2. They can play a move here like knight bd2, but we're just going to continue with knight g6, putting some pressure on this bishop. Notice this key knight maneuver. And here, if a move like bishop g3, we can simply castle queenside. We are down a pawn, but you plug this into a computer program, it's going to give you an advantage for black every single time, simply because the activity of our pieces. And on top of that, the fact that the white's not really going to be able to hang on to this pawn for very long, right? I mean, at the moment, we have two attacking pieces, our knight on g6 and our knight on c6. We have a move like rook h e8 on the way, putting even more pressure on that pawn. And against the king on e1, remember, guys, this king simply cannot castle. We have a bishop on g4 very active, putting pressure on f3. A bishop on c5 is also active in this game, putting some pressure on f2. This knight on c6 isn't just attacking the pawn e5, but also eyeing ideas like knight d4 at a moment's notice. Guys, from the white perspective, this is just a very hard position to work with. You are up a pawn, but that being said, trying to hold on to it is a nightmare, and this king is simply not going to be feeling comfortable for quite a while. So y'all, going back to this key position of e5, putting some pressure on d4. If white wants to take on e5, we're completely fine with that. We're going to take away the right to castle for the rest of the game, continue with bishop g4, pinning the knight on f3, continuing to develop our pieces, and black there with a very natural middle game position. What happens here if white tries a move like knight c3, trying to kick our queen around? Well, guys, we're not going to even move our queen. In fact, we're just going to play this move of bishop b4, pinning that knight. And here, if a move like bishop d2, okay, snatch that knight off, play a move here like e4. I mean, if you want to play knight d2, we have knight f6 with a space advantage and a very solid game. And here, if a move like knight e5, we'll snatch that knight off, play a move like knight e7. Notice here, guys, we don't want to take this queen on d1 because that would simply activate white's rook, but instead we'll just support the queen. And here, if white ever wants to take on d5, we'll capture back with the knight and have a very active minor piece right in the center of the board. Here, if we see a move like bishop e2, however, we can always play bishop f5, just naturally developing our light squared bishop, defending that pawn e4, and then continuing with a move like castling queenside, and here black has achieved equality. So y'all, knight c3 tries to kick this queen around, but it really doesn't because of this move of bishop b4, simply pinning it to the king on e1. What about this move of c4? Now, this may seem a little bit scary, and at first sight, it seems as if, okay, I mean, our queen's got to run somewhere, and then a move like d5 is going to come in. But guys, we actually have this option of queen e4 with check against the king. Notice how white simply cannot get this d5 move in. If we see a move like bishop e3, we're actually just going to take the pawn off the board, and from this point, continue to trade and trade and trade all the way to move 9, in which case we can now play bishop f5, and then castle queenside. Notice how often we're castling queenside in the Nimzowitsch defense. Here, if white castles queenside as well, we can play a move like knight e7 followed by knight c6, putting some pressure on d4. Guys, we have a very active bishop on f5, and here I would actually give a practical edge to black. We're both castled queenside, and white does have this pawn on c4, but I would say that this actually helps black in this case, simply because of the fact that this bishop is much more active, and we as black are putting some pressure on d4 at the moment, as well as e5. We have a very nice square here, such as bishop b4 for this bishop, putting pressure on c3, followed by putting a rook on e8. I think that white's position is a little bit too loose, and this king may not be feeling comfortable in the future. I'm giving this position to black in terms of who has the edge. See, y'all, going back to the Scandinavian variation, in which case we play d5. If white wants to take on d5, we're simply going to capture back with our queen, look at e5 ideas, activate both of our bishops, and we are going to have ourselves a very active middle game. What happens here, however, if white tries to lock the game up with e5 going into the advanced variation? Well, in this case, black actually has a pretty simple game. We're going to play bishop f5, followed by the move of e6. Notice how we're playing bishop f5 first, and then playing e6, instead of playing e6 and then having a tall pawn on d7 and or e8. And here, if we see a move like bishop d3, we can always play knight ge7, play a move here like queen d7. This is one of the options black has here, a very quiet move, very practical option. I mean, here, if white tries to play a move like knight g3, we can always just snatch that bishop off and really try to create more of a presence on the king side of the board with a move like h5, looking to play h4, kicking this knight around from some key light squares. And here, if white stops this with h4, we can play knight g6. Now, usually, guys, if we have a pawn on h5, having a knight on g6 could be a little bit awkward. But, guys, notice there is no bishop on d3. There's only a queen, and there's really no way for white to get rid of this knight anytime soon. We're already putting pressure on h4. We're eyeing a key square like f4. And from this point, black has some very easy developmental moves ahead. So y'all, in this advanced variation type system, okay, we're just going to lock things up with bishop f5, e6, etc. We could play queen d7, which is definitely a move here for black, but we could also try this idea of f6 if you're really trying to mix things up a little bit and create more inequalities. Look, we're putting some pressure on e5. If we see a move here from white, such as bishop f4 or f4, we can always just continue developing, right? Play queen d7, castling queenside, and keep the pressure in the center of the board here on f6 and e5. And if white ever tries to take on f6, okay, we take back with the g-pawn. If a move like knight f4 here, we can snatch off that bishop, play queen d7, castling queenside is one move away. We currently have knight f5 and also e5 ideas available, just kicking this knight around on f4, black here with a playable game. So if we see a move like e5 going back to the Scandi variation, we can always just play bishop f5, e6, and then from that point, do you want to develop your pieces, or do you also want to throw in this move of f6? That's really up to you. My biggest warning there is if you do play f6, don't take on e5 most of the time. Allow white to take on f6, and from there you're going to have a nice little pawn chain setup in the center of the board. What about this move of knight c3? Now, you're probably not going to see this move very often unless white is prepared for the Nimzowitsch defense. This is the Bogle-Juba variation. White here putting some pressure on d5 and also defending the pawn on e4. And really the main idea here from white is the fact that if we take on e4, which by the way is the best move, here white is able to play d5. Look, if white wants to take on e4, we can simply win this pawn on d4, right? Because we currently have 2 attacking pieces on that pawn. And here if we do see the move d5, we're actually going to centralize our knight to e5. And here again, white can fall into trouble very quickly. Look, if they want to take on e4, which seems like the very easy move, okay, they kicked away our knight, they can now take a pawn. We now play this move of e6, and there's surprisingly a ton of pressure on that pawn on d5. And if white wants to take on e6, you know the drill. We're going to take on d1 with check, play bishop takes e6, castle queenside, and black there is going to have an advantage in development. And here if we see a move like c4, expanding, trying to defend that pawn, we can always play this move of knight f6, right? Trying to put some pressure on that knight. If white wants to take on f6, we can capture back with the queen. And if we see a move here like bishop g5, which is played quite a bit in online chess, we can simply take off that pawn on d5, play bishop b4 check, forcing something like knight c3, in which case we can now castle kingside. And it goes without saying, guys, that black here is simply better, right? I mean, we have a huge edge in development, 5 pieces out. White, on the other hand, only has 2 pieces developed. This knight is pinned on c3. This isolated pawn on d5 is a big target. And we have a move here like rook e8 on the way, really trying to aim towards that king on e1. White here in some major trouble. So y'all, going back to this Bogol-Zubov position, in which case white plays d5, forcing knight e5. White here shouldn't really take on e4 because we have e6 eyeing to capture that pawn off on d5. And if white defends it with the most popular move online with c4, we have potential knight f6, taking on d5, and bishop b4 check options available. Instead, the best move for white is actually queen d4, right? Just trying to kick our knight around. I mean, we could play a move here like f6, but this is only going to make our development extremely awkward and also really compromise the safety of our king on e8. So instead, we're just going to play this move knight g6, and if white takes, okay, we play knight f6. If a move like queen a4 would check, we play bishop d7. White can continue to try to put as much pressure as they want on our position, but we can always just play a move here like a6, whole idea being that we are threatening to take this bishop because the rook is defended now since we play bishop d7. And if white decides to take on d7, we can simply take back with the queen, capture back with the knight. I would say that here white has a slight edge in terms of the position and the evaluation. But that being said, guys, I mean, black here has very close to equality. We have moves like knight b6, putting pressure on d5. We can also castle queenside. Here, black with a playable game. So yeah, we just covered a few different key variations for white against the Scandinavian variation and what to do against them. But I also wanted to cover this move of bishop b5. Again, not very popular, but we need to know what we're doing. In fact, right now, we're not going to play a passive move like queen d6 or, you know, play a6 trying to attack this bishop. Guys, we're simply going to just take off the pawn on e4. And we don't actually have to be worried about d5 because of this move of a6, right? Attacking the bishop. Whole idea being, if you want to play a move like bishop a4, we simply have b5, right? Expanding on the queen side. If you want to take on c6, we can capture off your queen, take on e4. We're currently up a pawn. I mean, white here can play a move like knight c3, in which case, okay, I mean, we simply can't hold on to both, but we can play a move there like e5, continue to rapidly develop our pieces, and notice that their king cannot castle, and our king can. Very interesting position here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that black's pawn structure is amazing, but that being said, we are up a pawn, so if white wins a pawn, okay, I mean, from that point, we're just going to continue to naturally develop our pieces, play chess, and also try to put pressure on c6. One key idea here for black that you can use is playing e5, and then trying to play knight e7, and simply snaps that pawn off the board, which is really going to free up some of our squares on the queenside camp. So y'all, against d5, again, we have to play this move a6. If we don't play this, we're simply just going to lose a piece, right? I mean, if we don't play a6, we're simply going to lose a piece and we're going to have a lost game. So we got to play this move a6, prepared to play b5 against a move like bishop a4. What happens here if white captures off the knight with either the pawn or the bishop? Let's first cover this move of bishop captures on c6 with check. Well, in this case, okay, we take back with the b pawn, capture off the queen, and here black with a relatively simple and easy game. If white tries to win this pawn on e4, we can always play a move here like bishop f5, defending it, and from this point, okay, I mean, we have ideas like castling queenside with check, and knight e7 again, followed by knight captures on c6, black here with a solid position to work with. So the bishop takes c6. Okay, we just capture off that bishop, take the queen, and we're sitting at even material. What about this move of d takes on c6? Well, in this case, yet again, take on d1 with check, make this king uncastled, and then simply play a takes b5, right? We're looking to capture on c6, and if white wants to take on b7, we simply capture back. And here's the deal. We're up a pawn in material. We have castling queenside for the 30th time in a row, looking to check this king. We're defending the pawn on e4. Development comes very easy. And you know what I'm going to say? We're just playing chess. See how, again, going back to this bishop b5 move, we don't need to be afraid of d5, right? In fact, if white does play d5, we simply play a6, whole idea being if you take my knight, I'm going to take your minor piece as well, and at bishop a4, we have b5 ready to go. But what happens here if white plays a move like knight c3, right? Not playing d5, which runs into a6, but instead just naturally developing a piece and actually looking to capture off this pawn on e4. Well, notice, guys, we cannot capture this pawn on d4. Okay, if you do that, you might as well just resign because this knight cannot capture back, as is pinned to the king on e8. So queen takes d4 is definitely not the answer here. The answer is actually this move of bishop d7, right? Just defending the knight on c6. And here, if we see a move like knight takes e4, we're actually going to go up a pawn in material because we can capture off that pawn on d4. Whole idea being, if you want to take on d7, we play queen captures and we're defending the knight. And if queen captures d4, we snatch off the bishop. And here, yet again, guys, we're up a pawn, black here with a 1 game. So we play this move of bishop d7 against knight c3, whole idea being, look, you can take on e4, which actually seems like a very solid move. I mean, why wouldn't white just take a pawn here and then be looking at ideas like d5? Well, the answer is that we have knight takes d4, and we're going to be the ones going up a material there. What happens if white plays d5 now? Well, in this case, okay, we'll just play knight e5. We'll be prepared to capture back with the queen. And if a move like queen d4, again, the common idea, dropping our knight back to g6, knight f6, ready to go. And we're just playing chess. So y'all, that concludes our segment on the Scandinavian variation with d5, right? Just pushing that light squared pawn, putting some pressure on e4, and playing chess from that point. A ton of nice variations and ideas there. However, there is another way for the Nimzowitsch Defense player to approach this system, and that is by playing the Kennedy variation with e5, right? Using the e-pawn, putting some pressure on d4. As I mentioned, the Scandinavian variation is the most popular option at the master and grandmaster level, but e5 is the most popular option as a whole. A lot of players really like going with this, especially in online chess. We're putting some pressure on d4, and white now has a big decision to make. The moves that we're really going to be covering that give us the most to study include these moves of d5, attacking our knight, and also this move of pawn takes on e5. But before we do these two main options of d5 advancing the pawn and simply capturing off the pawn on e5, let's look at this move of knight f3. I just wanted to mention this move because we actually just transposed into a Scotch game, and I'm not going to spend a ton of time here because we just transposed into a totally different opening system. But usually, guys, this position would be reached by e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then d4. If I was walking by a board and I saw this position, I would probably not think that it was originally a Nimzowitsch defense type position. But okay, I mean, in this position, guys, you can take on d4, and against knight takes d4, you have a lot of different options here, including knight f6, bishop c5, and queen f6, attacking the knight on d4. There's also this move of bishop b4 with check, which some players like, but I personally don't really like it for black, as white can simply play c3. So my recommendations there are playing knight f6, simply developing, playing bishop c5, going into the classical variation, or queen f6, simply putting some pressure on d4. It's going to take some study time. Let me know if you think I should make a video on how to play against the Scotch game in a video down in the comments below. So knight f3 is one way that white can kind of transpose into a different opening system. There's also this move of c3, right? Really just trying to defend the pawn on d4 and keep these pawns intact. And here there's actually a few different things that we can do as black. One of them is just playing this move of knight f6, right? Putting some pressure on e4, whole idea being if you play a move like d5, we can always transfer our knight to the king side of the board. We're eyeing squares such as bishop c5 for our bishop potentially, and really we're just creating a presence on the king side of the board, right? Both of these knights are very active. We're eyeing key dark squares such as f4 and h4, and we have a solid game ahead of us. So y'all, one option here is playing knight f6, ready to play knight e7, followed by knight g6. Kind of a Mortimer variation type system there. We could always just take this pawn on d4 as well, and then play d5, right? Very simple way to play. I mean, just take that pawn, advance in the center. If you see a move like e takes d5, okay, we take back with the queen, and we're really going up against an isolated pawn with moves like bishop b4 and bishop g4 ready to go if these knights ever come in. And here, if you see a move like e5 from white, we can always just develop here with bishop f5. The computer variation is actually this move of f6, right? Just trying to put some pressure on e5, but black can fall into trouble there if they're not careful. A move like bishop f5 is very safe, and it's just a good natural developmental move. In any case, bishop f5 or f6 here, and you're going to have yourself a solid game of chess. So yeah, we can play a move like knight f6. We can take on d4. We could also even just play a move like d5, right? Expanding in the center of the board immediately. Whole idea being if e takes d5, we capture back with the queen, and if d takes e5, we're able to play bishop e6 here. There's actually a few different moves that black can go with, including knight takes e5, taking the pawn, knight e7. I personally find this bishop e6 move, however, to be very fascinating, right? I mean, we're looking to castle queenside very quickly. We're already up in development, and if you take on d5, we're actually going to take back with the queen. Whole idea being, look, you can trade down. We are down a pawn. But here's the thing, just because queens are off the board doesn't mean that attacking chess is over. Here we're going to play this move of f6, simply looking to take our pawn back. And here if we take on f6, we're going to get our knight active and into the game. We have moves here such as bishop c5 and rook he8 available. This bishop on d5 is an absolute monster, putting pressure on g2 as well as a2 if white ever decides to castle queenside. And if you play a move like c4, you can kick our bishop back, but then you're going to have weak squares such as d4 and b4 for our knight and our bishop on f8. Here black with a big advantage. I'm taking black here any day of the week. So y'all, on top of knight f3 going into the scotch game, I did want to mention c3, which defends the pawn on d4. In that case, however, we have achieved equality. We have a lot of different moves there, including knight f6, taking the pawn, and d5, expanding in the center of the board immediately. What happens if white here goes into one of the main lines with d captures on e5? What happens if white just takes off this pawn? Well, here, okay, we're going to even out the material. Now white has two main moves that you're going to see most of the time. One of them just knight f3, putting some pressure on e5, and the other playing f4, trying to kick this knight around. Let's first take a look at this move of knight f3. In this case, we're simply going to capture off the knight and then play a move like queen f6. And guys, white here's going to have to deal with the fact that we're simply going to trade off queens, or that this queen's going to have to run away, right? White's going to have to play a move like queen g3. Actually a pretty good move, putting pressure on c7. We have to be careful here. We don't want to play d6 because then the development is going to be very awkward and cramped. We're instead actually going to play this move of bishop d6, attacking the queen on g3. White here with, yet again, another decision to kind of run away with the queen another time to a square like d3 or b3. White here could also try this move of f4, which is the best option, now actually threatening ideas like e5 in the future potentially. But we are going to play this move of bishop b4 with check, again attacking the king. If you play a move like knight c3, we'll snatch that knight off, giving you some pretty terrible pawn structure. If you play bishop d2, we're going to win the pawn on b2. And if a move like c3, we're going to play bishop c5. I don't usually recommend playing 3 straight bishop moves in a row, but notice what we did here by doing so. We really did nothing but allow white to play f4 and c3. Does this help or hurt white in the long run? I would say that it's actually more beneficial for black, because first off, f4 does 2 things for us. Sure, I mean, white does have more of a space advantage in the center of the board now, but in terms of the black perspective, this pawn on c7 is no longer attacked, right? We played bishop d6, forcing f4, and okay, queen takes c7 is no longer a threat. On top of that, by forcing white to play f4, our bishop on c5 is preventing the white king from castling kingside, right? And on top of that, sure, white does have that space advantage, but if white ever does play this move of e5, the light squares are going to be extremely weak, and I just don't see any real threats against the king on e8 in a position like this. I mean, even a move like queen g6 is very playable, just looking to trade down, putting some pressure on h2, and looking at knight e7, knight f5 ideas. Very nice game here for black. So yeah, if we ever see a move like e5, we can simply slide our queen over 1 step to the left, and we're going to be okay. What about this move of knight d2, or a move like knight d2, white just trying to develop their pieces? We actually have this idea of d5, expanding in the center of the board. Again, if white wants to play e5, these light squares, particularly the square of f5, is going to be very weak. And if white takes on d5 here, well, f5 is going to be weak anyways, right? We have this move of knight h6, eyeing key squares like g4 and f5, both of which put pressure on these highlighted dark squares, which are already attacked by our bishop on c5, right? I mean, just talk about a monster position for black. We have ideas like castling kingside and rook e8 in the air, knight f5 with tempo against the queen, and then just throwing our knight right into e3. I mean, there's so many different ideas here. White here with a very cramped and awkward game. This king cannot castle kingside yet again because of our bishop. It's actually very interesting. I mean, if you plug this into a computer program, it's going to give you a 0.4 advantage for white. So technically here, white is doing okay. However, guys, this is a computer speaking. This is stockfish. This is a, really computer analysis, assuming that white is going to play perfect defensive chess. One slip up, and black could win this game very quickly without much warning. So that covers this move of knight f3, right? Against the Kennedy variation, white takes on e5, plays knight f3. In that case, okay, just snatch off that knight, play queen f6, and we're just playing chess. What about this move of f4? This may seem very intimidating, as right now white is currently attacking 4 squares on the 5th rank at the moment. But that being said, guys, black is completely okay. In fact, in this position, we're looking again at a move like bishop c5, preventing this king from castling kingside. And if white tries to stop this with a move like bishop e3, we obviously can't play bishop c5, but we can play this move of d5. Shocking response, fighting for the center of the board, putting some pressure on e4. Here's the thing. If white plays a move like e5, their position is just going to be absolutely miserable, right? I mean, these pawns are way too overextended. We have d4 ideas in the air. f5 is extremely weak, right? So e5, black there with the edge, no doubt about it. If white here takes on d5, we have this key knight b4 idea. By the way, if white plays queen takes d5, okay, let's take the queen and then play knight b4. If white takes right away, we had knight b4, putting pressure on both d5 and c2. And some of you are probably wondering, okay, what's the big deal here, right? I mean, what happens if white just plays a move like knight c3, defending the pawn on d5? Well, in this case, we have the key idea of queen e7, attacking the pinned piece on e3, which originally was just trying to stop bishop c5 from happening. Now it's pinned because of this d5 and queen e7 idea. White here has to defend it. If they defend it with a move like queen e2, we can always just take on c2, distracting the queen, and then evening out the material, playing a move like bishop c5, and notice just how much of a monster this bishop is. Attacking f4, attacking the knight, preventing white from castling queenside. Very easy development on the way. And black here with the edge. Now going back to this move of queen e7, okay, if you see a move like queen e2, just take on c2, and you're going to have yourself a nice game there. What about king f2? Well, in this case, white is holding on to material, but yet again, the key idea, knight h6. This looks so strange, but guys, we're not just trying to attack g4, we're also trying to eye the square of f5. And if you look at this position at first sight, it may seem as if black's pieces are a little bit awkward, but they are doing a beautiful job. We're currently threatening knight g4 check against the king, simply winning this bishop and checkmating that king very quickly after a lot of threats, a lot of ideas on the board. I mean, if white ever plays a move like h3, we have knight f5, looking at, queen takes e3 and queen h4, followed by activating our bishop. Guys, here black with a hyper dynamic and active game. And in just a few moves, white may be close here to throwing in the towel. So yeah, that covers this move of d takes e5, right? Against the Kennedy variation, if white accepts this pawn, we're just going to take back with the knight. Whole idea being if f4, we have knight c6, and if knight f3, okay, we take off that knight, play queen f6, and we're just playing chess. What about this move of d5? This is by far white's most popular option in online chess, but I actually really like this line for black, because here we're going to play this move of knight c e7, right? What happens here if white plays the most popular option of c4, expanding on the queen side of the board? Well, really the main idea here, guys, is that we're trying to transfer our knight over to the king side of the board, right? Again, key idea, knight e7, knight g6. And now one of the biggest questions that we have to ask ourselves is how to activate this bishop properly on f8. Guys, we don't want to play passive chess here. We don't want to play d6 and then just put this bishop on e7 where it's barely going to be able to move. We want to put this bishop on either c5 or b4, and white simply cannot stop both, right? For example, let's say white here plays a move like bishop e3, trying to prevent bishop c5 from coming into the game. Okay, we play bishop b4 with check, and we now play knight f6, threatening to win this pawn on e4 as this knight is pinned. And here if we see a move like f3, I'm actually a big fan of this idea of playing b6. Notice, guys, we can't play d6 here because of queen a4 with check, and we just lost ourselves a minor piece, right? So going back to f3, we got to play b6 here, but we're not just playing b6 to really develop this bishop and not lose the bishop on b4. We're actually playing this move of b6, not so much to fianchetto this bishop, but to actually play bishop c5, right? Here, if white plays a move like a3, we're going to play bishop c5, attacking the bishop on e3. Here, if white decides to take on c5, we're going to take back with the pawn, lock this game up with a move like d6, and black here with a fantastic position. I mean, talk about owning the dark squares here. Knight f4, we're eyeing the square of h4. We have knight h5, knight f4, queen g5, queen h4 ideas there. Knight h5 followed by those queen moves are very strong. We have a move like rook b8, attacking the pawn on b2. Guys, there's so many options here for black. White here with a very awkward game. So y'all, if we see a move like bishop takes c5, okay, we're not actually too worried about getting double pawns. We're going to play d6, followed by knight h5, knight f4, queen g5. You get the drill, rook b8. There, black has a fantastic game. But what happens here if white declines to capture off the bishop and just plays a move like queen e2? Well, okay, we're not going to take this bishop. We're actually just going to play this move d6 and continue developing, right? It's going to be very hard for white to make anything happen here. And black here with a practical edge. So y'all, against the move d5, we're playing knight e7. We're transferring our knight over to g6, and we're really going to try to activate our bishop on f8 by either putting it on c5 or by putting it on b4. Either of these are great for black. However, I wanted to finish this video out by covering this move of f4. At first sight, guys, this may seem very scary. It may seem as if black is simply getting steamrolled in this position. And if we play a move like d6, that may be true. But guys, we're surprisingly just going to play knight g6 anyways. Remember against c4 how we just play knight g6? Well, things don't really change against the move of f4 because of the fact that we have this queen h4 check idea against the king. If white wants to take on e5 or play f5, in either case, we have queen h4 against this king. If you want to play g3, we got a bada boom, bada bang, winning that rook on h1 as we check that king, and white's going to have to block. And here, if a move like king d2, I actually don't really care at all about this knight on g6, right? I mean, I just don't care. I'm going to try to checkmate this king on d2 as quickly as I can. I'm going to play knight f6, looking to capture on e4 with check. I mean, here, if white plays a move like knight c3, it's obvious to say that black here is simply crushing. And if they take the knight trying to go up a piece, well, this game's almost over, right? We play knight takes e4 with check. This king is simply not going to be surviving very long. Thank you guys for watching today's video, and special thanks to everyone who has become a patron. My goal is to make this chess thing go full time, and you're all helping me create better chess content and drop it more often. If you'd like to check out my entire openings playlist, click that playlist to the left. If you'd like to see my top 10 chess openings for black against the move of d4, click that playlist to the right. Leave a comment down below to let me know what other videos you'd like to see covered on this channel. And as always, I appreciate you guys. Thanks for watching. Peace.